Organizational communication and conflict. Communication is a process which information is transmitted and understood between two or more people and is a vital skill for every organization and business to have. To have effective interactions, it requires individuals to speak clearly, listen carefully, and have appropriate body language. If messages are transmitted incorrectly, it can result in conflict within the organization. Conflict is a process which occurs when one person or group perceives another party to have negatively affected something the group or person cares about. This can also occur accidentally due to the lack of knowledge that an individual possesses about another person's culture or beliefs. Therefore, for an organization and business to run smoothly, they need to take the appropriate steps to understand effective communication and where conflict can arise. There are 5 theories of communication and conflict. These include the model of communication, which involves a sender who encodes the message which is transferred through a particular channel and finally decoded by the receiver. Cross-cultural verbal communication, which involves varying verbal communication based on another person's culture due to the way different cultures perceive things. Cross-cultural non-verbal communication involves particular body language, tone of voice, and expression that needs to be taken into account when talking to others with a different background to your own. Interpersonal conflict management styles is where conflict occurs in any setting whereby 2 or more people are required to collaborate to achieve the same goal. Cultural differences in conflict management, which explores the challenges faced by multinational corporations due to differences in cultures. Presentation, we look more closely into non-verbal cross-cultural communication. There are 5 non-verbal behaviours. These include speech illustrators, conversation regulators, self-adapters, emblematic gestures, and emotional signals. These behaviours are all influenced by culture and hold communicative value. A good example of non-verbal behaviours is gazing into another person's eyes when speaking to them. In some cultures, this can be seen as disrespectful, thus leading to conflict. Furthermore, non-verbal communication allows us to express emotions and attitudes, supplies additional information, and depicts personality. We looked into the Graham and Argyle 1975 cross-cultural study of communication of extraverbal meaning by gestures. The aim of this study was to see if hand gesture aided the information interpreted between 2 different cultural groups. One of the researchers' hypotheses was that more information can be conveyed if gestural communication is allowed. The method of this study is broken down into 3 parts: the participants, the materials, and the procedure. As for the participants, the study was conducted using individuals from Oxford University and the University of Milan. Participants were obtained on a volunteer basis. There were 24 males from Oxford University and 24 from the University of Milan. The participants were divided into groups, each consisting of 4 individuals of different cultures. For the materials, there were 24 cards that had abstract line drawings on them for each group. These drawings were either low codability or high codability. As you can see, the 2 images under materials, the top is high verbal codability, the bottom picture is low codability. The top is high codability because there are terms to easily describe it, such as triangle. The low codability drawings do not have a specific term to define it. Each group had a set A and B, both were 12 cards. There were 6 cards of each codability in both A and B sets. The procedure of the study required one of the 4 individuals in the groups to be the encoder and the other 3 to be the decoders. The encoder described the drawing on the card and the decoders had to draw the shape being described. The encoder sat 6 feet from the decoders, so the drawings could not be seen, and the decoders were spaced apart so they could not see each other's drawing. The encoder had to describe set A with their arms folded, but for set B they were permitted to use arm gestures while describing it. The findings from the experiments were summarized in F ratios and their corresponding significance levels. The larger the value, the greater the dispersion. It was found that performances with gestures utilized were better than when gestures were prohibited, and performance with high codability material were better than low codability material. Table 3 lists the mean scores per category, with gestures being highly significant, improving performance of both high and low codability material. It can also be concluded that the effect of adding gestures is greater on low verbal codability than high codability material. This experiment provides some insight into the particulars of nonverbal communication and the significance of human behavior such as gestures, facial expressions, and body language within nonverbal cross-cultural communication. As a group, we chose cross-cultural nonverbal communication as our topic as we are all from different nations. Jasmine is from Australia, Britt is from America, Yolanda and Pat are Chinese, and Alicia is Indonesian. This allowed us to deepen our understanding of how nonverbal communication aids verbal communication amongst cross-cultural groups. We all agreed that meeting in person where nonverbal communication like gestures were a lot easier to understand and interpret than just verbal communication across the internet. This is further expressed in the case study of the Asia Pacific Internet Marketing Systems Incorporated. A brief summary of the case study. During the first staff meeting in the Ames Beijing office, over a 2-metre long table sat two new assistant managers, Ahim from Dubai and George from Canada. Both men remained silent during the first meeting. On the second week, Ahim and George were involved in a conflict. Ing, the general manager, decided to hold a face-to-face meeting with each of them to explore the issue and found out it was due to cultural differences. Ing realised the usefulness of face-to-face meetings where non-verbal communication can be used to solve the conflict. Aman and George have different verbal and non-verbal communication styles. Aman is used to having meetings in smaller group settings, while George is used to communicating with larger audiences and settings. When a conversation was held between the two men, Ahim, a Middle Eastern man, used higher and louder inflection to indicate sincerity, while George, a Westerner, who used softer inflection, received it as Aman shouting at him. Aman was also more open with his personal feelings compared to George because he told Ing about the conflict straight after it happened. George had to be provoked by Ing to open up about the conflict. In terms of nonverbal communication, Amin has a warm gesture and likes to stand at a close proximity to indicate friendliness, while George prefers distance to indicate respect of personal space. Amin became aware and thought he may have invaded George's personal space when they communicated, therefore went to Ing. Chinese people tend to have high context communication style that focuses on long-term relationships as well as a collective style that prioritizes teamwork. Thus, Ing addresses the issue immediately. Ing realizes the need to manage the conflict through both verbal and non-verbal communication. He addresses the cultural issue by setting up a face-to-face meeting between Aman and George. This is a successful way to address the conflict, as face-to-face communication allows non-verbal communication methods such as hand gestures, emotional signals, and conversation regulators to aid the decoder in understanding where the conflict arose and the sincerity of the encoder. Thus, the use of communication, which is verbal, and hand gestures, emotional signals, which is non-verbal, Amin and George were able to understand each other's culture and resolve their conflict. Finally, there are many areas of organizational communication and conflict that is important for an organization and business to understand and implement techniques to achieve effective communication and conflict resolution. Nonverbal communication plays an extremely important role in how people interpret and receive verbal communication, especially between cross-cultural groups. From the Grahams and Argyle's 1975 study, hand gestures increase understanding between cross-cultural groups. This is further backed up by the case study in which Aman and George overcome their conflict due to the face-to-face meeting held where non-verbal communication like hand gestures can be used. Therefore, when communicating and resolving conflict, non-verbal communication plays an integral part of how people perceive what has been said verbally.